A 16-year-old girl accused of murdering the teenager Brianna Ghey has told a court she wasn't there when a teenage boy started stabbing the victim.
Prior to the trial, I had moments where I felt sorry for the defendants because they had ruined their own lives as well.
Brianna Ghey, just 16 years old, was stabbed 28 times. Yes, you heard me right. 28 times. Her story isn't just about her tragic death. It's about who she was, what happened that day, and why we need to talk about it. Welcome to this story, a story that's hard to hear but important to tell. February 11, 2023, a quiet Saturday afternoon in Warrington, England. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and life seemed peaceful. But beneath that calm surface, something unimaginable was about to happen. In this very park, a bright young life came to an abrupt and violent end. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever stopped to think about how safe you feel walking through a park? Do you take it for granted that you can go outside without fear? For Brianna, that sense of safety was shattered in the most brutal way possible. Why do you think some people face danger simply because of who they are? Let's dive deeper into this question. Imagine yourself in Brianna's shoes. What if you couldn't walk down the street without worrying about being judged, harassed, or worse? How would that affect your daily life? Would you still be able to chase your dreams? These are the kinds of realities many transgender individuals face every single day. And today we're going to explore not only Brianna's story, but also the broader issues surrounding hate crimes against transgender people. But before we get into all of that, let's take a moment to really understand who Brianna was. Because behind the headlines and statistics, there was a real person, a vibrant, courageous teenager with hopes, fears, and so much love to give. Welcome to Fatal Fame, where all our stories are based on true crimes. Please support us by subscribing to this channel and clicking the notification bell icon so you don't miss any of our latest stories. Now that we've set the stage, let's take some time to really get to know Brianna Ghey. Who was she? What made her special? Because here's the thing. Brianna wasn't just a name or a headline. She was a person, a real, living, breathing human being who had dreams, fears, and so much love to give. If we're going to honor her memory, we need to understand her, not as a victim, but as someone who brought light into the lives of everyone around her. Let's start at the beginning. Brianna was born in 2006 in Warrington, England, a small town where everybody knows everybody. From a young age, Brianna stood out, not because she was loud or attention-seeking, but because she had this quiet confidence about her. Even as a child, she seemed to know exactly who she was. Now, for most kids, figuring out their identity is a slow process. But for Brianna, it was different. She knew early on that she was transgender. Now, imagine being a kid and realizing you're different from the people around you. How do you think that feels? For Brianna, it probably felt like carrying a secret that she wasn't sure how to share. But instead of hiding, she chose to embrace who she was. And that takes courage, so much courage. Think about it. How many of us can say we've always been true to ourselves, no matter what others thought? As Brianna grew older, she became more open about her identity. She started transitioning, which means she began living fully as the girl she knew she was inside. Transitioning isn't easy. It comes with challenges that most of us can't even imagine. There's the emotional toll of coming out to family and friends. There's the fear of rejection. And then there's the outside world, where not everyone is kind or understanding. But through all of that, Brianna kept moving forward. One of the things people loved most about Brianna was her sense of style. She had this incredible eye for fashion, bright colors, bold patterns. You name it, Brianna wore it. She wasn't afraid to stand out, and honestly, she made standing out look fun. Her outfits weren't just clothes. They were expressions of who she was. If you saw Brianna walking down the street, you'd notice her immediately, not because she was trying to draw attention, but because she carried herself with this quiet confidence that was impossible to ignore. And then there was her personality. Oh, her personality. Brianna was one of those people who could light up a room just by walking into it. She had this laugh, this big, contagious laugh, this big, contagious laugh that could make anyone feel better. One of her friends once said, "Even when things got tough, Brianna found a way to make you smile." Isn't that amazing? In a world that can sometimes feel heavy, Brianna was a reminder that joy is possible, even in the hardest moments. But here's the thing, being transgender doesn't come without its struggles. For Brianna, every day was a balancing act. On one hand, she had this incredible support system, her family, her close friends, her community. They loved her for who she was and cheered her on as she pursued her dreams. But on the other hand, there were challenges, bullying, discrimination, judgment. It's something many transgender teens face daily. Imagine waking up every morning knowing that someone might say something hurtful to you simply because of who you are. Imagine walking into school and wondering if today will be the day someone calls you a name or makes you feel less than. That's the reality for so many transgender youth, including Brianna. Studies show that transgender teens are more likely to experience depression, anxiety, and even thoughts of suicide than their peers. It's heartbreaking, isn't it? But despite all of that, Brianna kept pushing forward. She didn't let fear stop her from dreaming big. One of her biggest dreams was to become a makeup artist. Can you picture her doing that? Helping people feel confident and beautiful, using her creativity to bring out the best in others. That's the kind of person Brianna was, someone who wanted to spread joy and positivity wherever she went. And let's talk about her social media presence for a moment. If you scrolled through Brianna's Instagram or TikTok, you'd see posts full of color, energy, and life. She shared her journey openly, documenting her highs and lows with honesty and grace. For many people, Brianna's online presence was inspiring. She showed them that it's okay to be yourself, even when the world tries to tell you otherwise. But here's a question for you. Why do you think Brianna chose to share so much of her life online? Was it because she wanted to connect with others like her? Was it because she wanted to inspire people? Or maybe it was both. Either way, her posts remind us of something important. Representation matters. Seeing someone like Brianna living authentically gives hope to others who might be struggling to find their place in the world. Now, let's pause for a moment and reflect on something. Have you ever met someone who reminded you of Brianna? Someone who radiated kindness, confidence, and authenticity. What impact did they have on your life? Because here's the truth. People like Brianna leave a mark on the world, not just through their presence, but through the way they make others feel. Before we move on, I want to leave you with one final thought. When we talk about Brianna, it's easy to focus on the tragedy of her death. But that's not the whole story. The whole story is about who she was while she was alive. It's about her laughter, her dreams, her courage. It's about the fact that she refused to dim her light, even when the world tried to blow it out. So, as we continue this journey together, let's remember Brianna not as a victim, but as a fighter. A fighter for authenticity, for joy, for love, because that's who she truly was. Now that we've taken the time to get to know Brianna, the person she was, the dreams she had, the light she brought into the world, it's time to talk about what happened on February 11, 2023. This is the hardest part of the story to tell, but it's also one of the most important. Understanding the details of Brianna's murder helps us understand the bigger picture, the hate, the violence, and the systemic issues that allowed this tragedy to happen. Let's start by setting the scene. It's a Saturday afternoon in Warrington, England. The sun is shining, the air is crisp, and life seems peaceful. Brianna meets up with some friends at Culcheth Linear Park, a place where teenagers often hang out, laugh, and enjoy each other's company. Everything seems normal. At around 3 p.m., her friends decide to leave, but Brianna stays behind. Maybe she wanted a few moments to herself. Maybe she felt safe there. Little did she know, danger was lurking nearby. At approximately 5 p.m., 2 teenagers approached Brianna. Within minutes, she was brutally attacked. Stabbed 28 times with a hunting knife. Can you wrap your head around that number? 28. Each stab represents a moment of sheer terror. Each wound tells a story of hatred and cruelty. When a passerby discovered Brianna's body at 5:30 p.m., the scene was horrifying. Blood stained the ground, her dreams, her future, all cut short in an instant. Let me pause here for a moment. Imagine being that passerby. Imagine coming across something so violent, so senseless. How do you think you'd react? Would you freeze? Would you scream? Would you try to help? These are the kinds of scenarios that make us realize how fragile life really is, and how quickly it can be taken away. Now, let's break this down step by step. First, the timeline. At 3 p.m, Brianna is seen laughing and chatting with her friends. She's happy, carefree, just like any other teenager on a sunny afternoon. By 5 p.m, she's alone. That's when the attackers strike. They don't warn her. They don't hesitate. They attack her with a level of brutality that's hard to comprehend. Here's something to think about. What kind of mindset does it take to commit an act like this? What drives someone to hurt another human being? Especially someone they know personally. These are questions investigators grappled with as they pieced together the events of that day. The weapon used in the attack was a hunting knife, a large sharp blade designed to kill. One of the suspects, Eddie Ratcliffe, reportedly carried the knife with him regularly. Why would a 15-year-old boy feel the need to carry a weapon like that? Was it for protection? For intimidation? Or was it something darker? And then there's Scarlett Jenkinson. From what we know, Scarlett had a fascination with violence. She idolized serial killers and often bragged about wanting to commit crimes herself. Some classmates recall her bullying Brianna online, calling her names and threatening her. Does that sound like typical teenage behavior to you? Or does it point to something more sinister? Here's the kicker. Both suspects knew Brianna personally. They weren't strangers randomly targeting her. No, this was personal. Experts believe jealousy and hatred played major roles in motivating their actions. But where does that hatred come from? Is it learned, taught, or is it something else entirely? Think about the people in your own community. Could you spot warning signs like these? Would you speak up if you noticed someone behaving violently or expressing hateful views? Remember, silence can sometimes be just as dangerous as the act itself. Now let's talk about the investigation. When police arrived at the scene, they immediately treated the case as a potential hate crime. Why? Because the evidence pointed to it. Brianna was targeted because of who she was, a transgender girl living authentically. And sadly, this isn't an isolated incident. Across the globe, transgender individuals face violence simply for existing. Investigators worked tirelessly to track down the perpetrators. They gathered evidence, interviewed witnesses, and eventually identified Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe as the suspects. Both were arrested shortly after the murder. During questioning, they confessed to their involvement in the attack. But here's the thing. Confessions and arrests don't bring Brianna back. They don't erase the pain her family feels every single day. They don't undo the trauma experienced by her friends and loved ones. Justice is important, but it's not enough. Not when lives are being lost to hatred and ignorance. Let's take a moment to reflect on something. When you hear about crimes like this, do you ever wonder what could have been done to prevent them? Could teachers have intervened earlier? Could parents have noticed warning signs? Could society as a whole have done more to address the root causes of hate and violence? Because here's the truth. Crimes like this don't happen in a vacuum. They're symptoms of larger problems like discrimination, misinformation, and systemic inequality. Until we address those issues, tragedies like Brianna's murder will continue to happen. Before we move on, I want to leave you with one final thought. Brianna didn't deserve what happened to her. No one does. But her story reminds us of something important. We have a responsibility to stand up against hate, to speak out against violence, and to create a world where everyone, regardless of who they are, can live safely and authentically. So, as we continue this journey together, let's honor Brianna's memory by committing to that responsibility. Now that we've explored the events of February 11, 2023, the day Brianna Gay's life was tragically cut short, it's time to turn our attention to the two teenagers responsible for her murder, Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe, understanding who they were, what motivated them, and how they came. To commit such a horrific act is crucial if we want to prevent tragedies like this from happening again. Let's start with Scarlett Jenkinson. From everything we know about her, Scarlett was a troubled young person. She had a fascination with violence, specifically serial killers. Some classmates recall her talking openly about her admiration for infamous murderers, even going so far as to idolize them. Does that sound like typical teenage behavior to you? Or does it point to something darker? Scarlett also reportedly bullied Brianna online, calling her names and threatening her. Now, think about that for a moment. Bullying isn't just teasing or harmless jokes. It can escalate into something much more dangerous. In Scarlett's case, it seems her behavior went beyond mere words. Her actions suggest a deep-seated hatred, not just toward Brianna, but perhaps toward transgender people in general. But here's the question. Where does that hatred come from? Is it something she learned at home, from friends, from media or societal influences? These are the kinds of questions experts grapple with when trying to understand why someone like Scarlett would target someone like Brianna. Now let's talk about Eddie Ratcliffe. On the surface, Eddie seemed quieter, more reserved than Scarlett. But dig a little deeper and you'll find troubling signs. He reportedly struggled with anger management issues and carried the knife used in the murder. Where did he get it? Why did he feel the need to carry it? These are questions investigators worked tirelessly to answer. One theory is that Eddie may have been influenced by Scarlett. Maybe she encouraged him to bring the knife. Maybe she convinced him that carrying a weapon made him tougher, stronger. Or maybe he brought it for entirely different reasons we may never fully understand. There's something to think about. How much influence do peers have over each other during adolescence? If Scarlett hadn't been in Eddie's life, do you think he still would have participated in the attack? It's a difficult question to answer, but it highlights the importance of surrounding ourselves with positive influences. People who uplift us rather than drag us down. Both Scarlett and Eddie knew Brianna personally. They weren't strangers randomly targeting her. No, this was personal. Experts believe jealousy and hatred played major roles in motivating their actions. But why would they feel jealous of Brianna? Was it because she was living authentically while they struggled with their own identities? Was it because she stood out in ways they wished they could? We may never know for sure. Let's pause here for a moment and reflect on something. Have you ever felt jealous of someone else? Maybe it was a friend who seemed happier, more successful, or more confident than you. What did that jealousy feel like? Did it motivate you to improve yourself, or did it make you resentful? Because here's the thing, jealousy is a natural emotion, but how we handle it matters. For Scarlett and Eddie, their jealousy turned into something far more destructive. Now let's talk about accountability. After months of investigation, both Scarlett and Eddie were arrested and charged with Brianna's murder. During questioning, they confessed to their involvement in the attack. But here's the question. Does a confession mean they take responsibility for their actions? Or is it simply an admission of guilt without true remorse? Experts say that understanding the psychology behind acts of violence like this is key to preventing future tragedies. For example, studies show that many young people who commit violent crimes often struggle with mental health issues, trauma, or unstable home environments. Could this have been the case for Scarlett and Eddie? Were there warning signs that adults in their lives missed? Let's take a closer look at their backgrounds. Scarlett reportedly grew up in a household where violence was normalized. Her parents allegedly fought frequently, and she witnessed scenes of aggression from a young age. Could this have shaped her worldview? Could it have taught her that violence is an acceptable way to solve problems? As for Eddie, his upbringing was marked by instability. His parents divorced when he was young, and he reportedly bounced between homes, never quite finding a sense of belonging. Could this lack of stability have contributed to his anger issues? Could it have made him more susceptible to negative influences like Scarlett? Here's another question to consider. How much responsibility do parents and guardians bear in shaping a child's values and behaviors? Is it fair to blame them entirely for the actions of their children? Or is it more complicated than that? Now let's talk about the role of society. While Scarlett and Eddie's individual circumstances are important, we can't ignore the broader cultural factors at play. For example, transgender individuals often face disproportionate levels of violence and discrimination. Misinformation, political rhetoric, and social exclusion all contribute to a climate where hate crimes thrive. In Brianna's case, her gender identity clearly played a role in her murder. The judge presiding over the trial described the crime as sadistic in nature and acknowledged that Brianna's transgender status was a motivating factor. That's a sobering reminder of the dangers faced by transgender people every single day. Before we move on, I want to leave you with one final thought. Crimes like this don't happen in isolation. They're symptoms of larger problems like ignorance, inequality, and systemic injustice. Until we address those root causes, tragedies like Brianna's murder will continue to occur. So, as we continue this journey together, let's honor Brianna's memory by committing to change, not just in our own lives, but in our communities and societies as well. After months of investigation, court hearings, and heart-wrenching testimonies, justice finally arrived, for Brianna and her family, at least. In December 2023, Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe were sentenced to life in prison for the brutal murder of Brianna Guy. While this verdict brought some measure of closure, it also raised important questions about accountability, rehabilitation, and the broader societal issues that allowed such a tragedy to occur. Let's start by breaking down what happened during the trial. For months, the courtroom was filled with tension as prosecutors presented evidence, witnesses shared their accounts, and defense attorneys argued their cases. The prosecution painted a chilling picture of premeditated violence. Two teenagers targeting Brianna because of who she was. They highlighted the brutality of the attack, the use of a hunting knife, and the fact that Brianna was stabbed 28 times. The defense, on the other hand, tried to argue that Scarlett and Eddie were simply kids who made a terrible mistake. But here's the thing, was this really a mistake, or was it something far more deliberate? The judge didn't mince words when delivering the sentence. She described the crime as sadistic in nature and explicitly acknowledged that Brianna's gender identity played a significant role in her murder. Those words carry weight, don't they? Now, let's talk about the sentencing itself. Both Scarlett and Eddie were handed life sentences, a decision that sparked mixed reactions. Some people felt relief, believing that justice had been served. Others questioned whether locking up two teenagers for life was truly the best solution. After all, they were only 15 years old at the time of the crime. Should they be given a chance at rehabilitation? Or does the severity of their actions warrant such a harsh punishment? Here's something to think about. What purpose does punishment serve in cases like this? Is it meant to deter others from committing similar crimes? To provide closure for the victim's family? Or is it simply a way to remove dangerous individuals from society? These are complex questions with no easy answers. During the trial, Brianna's family spoke out, sharing their grief and demanding accountability. Her mother, in particular, delivered an emotional statement that left many in tears. She talked about Brianna's dreams, her laughter, and the gaping hole her death had left in their lives. She also called for systemic change, urging lawmakers to do more to protect transgender individuals from violence. Her words struck a chord with many people. Across the globe, public outrage poured in. Candlelight vigils were held in Brianna's honor. Protesters marched through cities, chanting slogans like "Justice for Brianna" and "Protect Trans Lives." Social media campaigns gained traction, spreading awareness about the dangers faced by transgender youth. What struck me most about these reactions was the unity. People from all walks of life came together, not just to mourn Brianna's loss, but to demand change. Have you ever been part of a movement like that? What motivates you to stand up for what's right? Because trust me, movements like these don't succeed without everyday heroes stepping up. Now, let's talk about the legal implications of this case. Juvenile sentencing laws vary widely depending on the country and jurisdiction. In this case, the judge ruled that Scarlett and Eddie's actions were so heinous that they warranted adult-level consequences. But not everyone agrees with that decision. Some experts argue that children, even those who commit violent crimes, are still capable of change. They believe that rehabilitation should be prioritized over punishment. Others, however, point to the severity of the crime and argue that leniency would send the wrong message. If someone can stab another person 28 times at the age of 15, what's to stop them from committing further acts of violence in the future? It's a difficult balance to strike, isn't it? Let's pause here for a moment and reflect on something. Do you think the justice system handled this case appropriately? Would you have preferred a different outcome? Why or why not? Now, let's talk about the bigger picture. While sentencing Scarlett and Eddie to life in prison may bring some sense of justice, it doesn't address the root causes of hate crimes against transgender individuals. Discrimination, misinformation, and systemic inequality all contribute to a climate where violence thrives. Until we tackle those underlying issues, tragedies like Brianna's murder will continue to happen. For example, studies show that transgender individuals are disproportionately affected by hate crimes. In the US, the Human Rights Campaign reported that 2022 saw a record number of transgender murders with at least 57 known victims. Most of them transgender women of color. In the UK, anti-transgender hate crimes have risen sharply over the past decade, with a particularly alarming spike in recent years. These statistics aren't just numbers. They represent real lives lost, real families shattered, real communities grieving, and yet, despite the growing awareness of these issues, progress feels slow. Too slow. Before we move on, I want to leave you with one final thought. Justice is important, but it's not enough. Not when lives are being lost to hatred and ignorance. As we honor Brianna's memory, let's commit to creating a world where everyone, regardless of who they are, can live safely and authentically. So, as we continue this journey together, let's remember that Brianna's story isn't just about her tragic death. It's about her vibrant life, her courage, and the legacy she leaves behind. A legacy of love, resilience, and hope. Brianna Ghey's murder is a devastating reminder of the dangers faced by transgender individuals every single day. But here's the hard truth. Brianna's story isn't unique. Across the globe, transgender people are targeted simply for existing. Simply for being who they are. To truly honor her memory, we need to zoom out and look at the bigger picture. What are the statistics behind hate crimes against transgender individuals? Why do these crimes happen? And most importantly, what can we do to stop them? Let's start with the numbers. According to the Human Rights Campaign, HARCS, 2022 was one of the deadliest years on record for transgender people in the United States. At least 57 transgender individuals were killed. Most of them transgender women of color. Think about that number for a moment. 57 lives lost. That's 57 families grieving, 57 communities mourning, 57 futures stolen. And those are just the cases we know about. Many hate crimes go unreported or misclassified, meaning the actual number could be much higher. In the UK, the situation is equally alarming. Data shows a steady rise in anti-transgender hate crimes over the past decade, with a sharp increase in the last 5 years. In 2022 alone, police recorded over 3,000 incidents of hate crimes targeting transgender individuals. These include physical assaults, verbal harassment, and even murder. Now, let's break this down further. Who are the victims of these crimes? Studies show that transgender women of color are disproportionately affected. Why? Because they face multiple layers of discrimination, racism, sexism, transphobia, all intersecting to make them more vulnerable to violence. Here's something to think about. Have you ever stopped to consider how different forms of discrimination overlap? For example, a transgender woman of color might face racism from some parts of society and transphobia from others. She might struggle to find safe housing, secure employment, or access healthcare. These systemic barriers don't just make life harder, they also put her at greater risk of violence. Now, let's talk about why these crimes happen. Experts point to several factors, including misinformation, political rhetoric, and social exclusion. Misinformation spreads like wildfire on social media, fueling stereotypes and reinforcing harmful beliefs about transgender people. Political leaders sometimes use divisive language that dehumanizes marginalized groups, making it easier for others to justify acts of violence. And social exclusion. Whether it's being ostracized at school, rejected by family, or denied basic rights, leaves transgender individuals isolated and vulnerable. Let's pause here for a moment and reflect on something. How much influence do you think media and politics have on shaping public attitudes toward transgender people? Do you believe that words matter? That the language we use can either harm or heal? Because here's the thing, words have power. They shape how we see the world and how we treat each other. Now, let's talk about the impact of these hate crimes, not just on the victims, but on the broader community. When someone like Brianna is murdered, it sends shockwaves through the transgender community. It reinforces the fear that many transgender individuals live with daily, the fear of being attacked, harassed, or worse. Imagine waking up every morning knowing that someone might hurt you simply because of who you are. How would that affect your mental health, your sense of safety, your ability to pursue your dreams? Studies show that transgender individuals are at higher risk of depression, anxiety, and suicide. Not because there's something inherently wrong with them, but because of the constant stress and trauma caused by living in a hostile world. Here's another question to consider. What role do allies play in combating hate crimes? If you're not part of the transgender community, how can you use your voice, your privilege, and your resources to create a safer, more inclusive world? Now, let's talk about solutions. While the statistics are sobering, there's hope. Organisations like Stonewall UK, the Trevor Project, and the Human Rights Campaign are working tirelessly to combat anti-transgender violence and push for stronger hate crime laws. Grassroots movements are gaining momentum, with activists organizing protests, educational campaigns, and support networks for transgender youth. But change doesn't happen overnight. It requires all of us to step up, to educate ourselves, challenge harmful stereotypes, and advocate for policies that protect marginalized groups. For example, schools can implement anti-bullying programs that specifically address LGBTQ issues. Employers can create inclusive workplaces where everyone feels valued and respected. Lawmakers can pass legislation that strengthens protections for transgender individuals and holds perpetrators of hate crimes accountable. Before we move on, I want to leave you with one final thought. Brianna's murder is a tragedy, but it's also a call to action. It reminds us that silence is complicity, that standing by while others suffer is not an option. As we honor Brianna's memory, let's commit to creating a world where everyone, regardless of who they are, can live safely and authentically. So, as we continue this journey together, let's remember that Brianna's story isn't just about her tragic death. It's about her vibrant life, her courage, and the legacy she leaves behind. A legacy of love, resilience, and hope. As we come to the end of this journey, let's take a moment to remember Brianna Gay, not as a victim, but as a vibrant, courageous young woman who brought light into the lives of everyone around her. Her story is heartbreaking, yes, but it's also inspiring. It reminds us of the power of authenticity, the importance of love, and the urgent need for change. Let's start by reflecting on what made Brianna so special. She was more than just a name or a headline. She was a daughter, a friend, a dreamer. She loved fashion, had big aspirations, and fought hard to live authentically in a world that often didn't understand her. She wasn't afraid to stand out, to be unapologetically herself. And isn't that something we can all learn from? Brianna's courage inspires us to embrace who we are, even when it's hard. Her laughter reminds us to find joy in the little things, even when life feels heavy. Her dreams challenge us to keep reaching for a better future, a future where everyone, regardless of who they are, can live safely and authentically. Now, let's talk about her legacy. Since her tragic death, Brianna's story has sparked a global movement. People everywhere are standing up against hate, speaking out against violence, and demanding justice for transgender individuals. Candlelight vigils have been held in her honor. Protesters have marched through cities, chanting slogans like "Justice for Brianna" and "Protect Trans Lives." Social media campaigns have spread awareness, keeping her memory alive and inspiring others to take action. Her family has also become advocates for change. They've spoken out about the dangers faced by transgender youth, urging lawmakers to strengthen hate crime laws and improve protections for marginalized communities. Their courage in the face of unimaginable grief is a testament to Brianna's spirit, a spirit that continues to inspire hope and resilience. Here's something to think about. What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind? How do you want to be remembered? For Brianna, her legacy is one of love, courage, and advocacy. She may no longer be with us, but her impact lives on, in the hearts of those who loved her, in the movements she inspired, and in the changes we're working toward in her name. Now, let's talk about how we can honor Brianna's memory. It starts with small actions that, when multiplied, create big change. Educate yourself about the challenges faced by transgender individuals. Speak out against hate and discrimination whenever you see it. Support organizations that are fighting for equality and justice. And most importantly, listen to the voices of those directly affected. Because change doesn't happen without understanding, and understanding begins with empathy. Here's another question to consider. What's one thing you can do today to make the world a safer, kinder place for transgender people? Maybe it's having a conversation with a friend or family member about LGBTQ issues. Maybe it's donating to an organization that supports transgender youth. Or maybe it's simply being more mindful of the language you use and the assumptions you make. Every action matters. Before we close, I want to leave you with one final thought. Brianna's story is a reminder that love is stronger than hate, but only if we choose to act. We have the power to create a world where tragedies like this don't happen. A world where everyone, regardless of who they are, can live freely and authentically. So, as we say goodbye to Brianna's story, let's carry her memory with us. Let's honor her life by committing to kindness, courage, and change, because that's what she would have wanted. Brianna Gay's light may have been extinguished far too soon, but her legacy shines brightly. Through her story, we are reminded of the beauty of authenticity, the pain of loss, and the power of love. Thank you for joining me on this difficult yet necessary journey. If this documentary touched your heart, please share it with others. Together, we can spread awareness, spark conversations, and inspire change. And if you'd like to see more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue telling important stories that matter. Let's honor Brianna's memory by ensuring her story inspires action, not just today, but forever.